probably click that down.
Is this hello? Oh, is it on?
Are you the room person?
Yes, I am the room.
Okay. Are you taking care of the recording?
No, I have no idea
Okay.
about the recording. Sorry.
So you should be able to just I'm looking for that. There was a toolbar.
Big size. So many people.
Size shepherding people.
We still have some time, so.
So you're saying this is a last minute?
Yeah,
it was. We got
signed
asked
up
yesterday.
Oh.
So that should be fun.
Oh, the system, user interface and user expression. Oh, yeah. This one is same. Okay, that's
So your session ends at 1:45.
Yeah.
Do you want like 5 minutes beforehand to read them, or are you monitoring your time?
We are, but if it was gonna hold, like you can call up like 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Do that. Do you want some water?
Oh, got Mountain Dew, thank you.
It is a type of water.
Yeah.
It's a special property.
Which one's mine? This one?
Okay, you're all set.
Thanks, I was doing more harm than help out there.
Yeah, it's a user experience. Should we go through it? Hello.
Oh, your feet. Oh, sorry. I thought you were someone else needing you. Oh. Sorry. Oh, well. Just not too pointing out. Yeah.
I hope we get more people. Though I do know it's last minute, so.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
All right, everybody. It's 1 after the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is not Staying Sane for Drupal. This is Agile UI, UX, and Mobile Responsiveness. If you do want to stay sane for Drupal, you can go across the hall, but otherwise you're definitely welcome to stay with us today. So is everyone in the right place? All right, cool.
Here, take that for me.
So just want to tell you a little bit about us. First up.
Hi, I'm James Robertson. I'm a senior developer, Drupal developer at Blackstone Technology Group. I've been using Drupal since about 2008, so I'm a pretty well-seasoned veteran. The last few years I've been working on more of the theming layer and the front end, especially doing mobile responsiveness. I'm also the co-author of Drupal for Education and E-Learning. You can just Google it. It's on Amazon, Pact, Publishing, etc. So.
And my name is Tanu. It's short for Tanu McCabe. I'm a Senior Manager Technical Solutions Lead at Blackstone Technology Group. And for the past several years, I've been working in cloud systems, supporting Drupal, and also doing Agile. So we are very excited to be here today. Our goal for this session is for you to understand more about how to incorporate UI, UX design, and some tangible takeaways on that into the Agile process, as well as review some mobile responsive approaches. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to get out of today's session? Anything else you wanted to learn? Okay, so we're actually going to go ahead and start just by understanding a little bit more about you. So just a show of hands, who here is already a UI or UX designer? Great. Who here is a developer? All right. Any business side professionals here? And if you didn't raise your hand, what are you?
Project manager.
Oh, there we go. Project managers. Yes, very important people as well. So on your current projects, are you already lucky enough to be on a mobile-first project?
Raise your hands.
Raise your hands, yes. Oh, good, good.
Oh, good.
And the rest of you, can we assume that you are not as fortunate and you have to maybe retrofit mobile to your projects? All right. And hopefully what we talk about today will speak to you. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the process section. So how do you actually do user-focused design? Now, certainly in Agile, I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with Agile, you're familiar with requirements, and the whole perspective of as a user and really identifying your audience. That is all well and good, but what I wanted to talk about today is the concept of a user-focused session and usability testing. And what I've outlined here is just a typical Agile Scrum process in this case, made of multiple sprints, and just a recommendation that the user-focused session be held up front. And we'll go into detail on what these sessions are and how they can help your overall project. And then usability testing, just as a representation, would recommend doing it a couple of times, and then finally you would output with a release. So it's a very high level, and of course this would be adapted for your specific Agile cycle. But one note, or advice if you will, in general it does take at least twice as long to design and develop a mobile responsive site. So if you're already familiar with Agile development and you already have a consistent philosophy for a normal site, just in your head, go ahead and double it if you're looking at mobile responsive. So the user-focused session is basically a facilitated session, and its primary purpose is to figure out aesthetic preferences. So this would be preferences for the page layout, graphics, design elements, look and feel, things like that. And the point of this session is to really confirm what the purpose of your application is. So typically, a group of stakeholders will have already defined the purpose of the application for you. What this session does is it takes any wireframes or mock-ups you may already have and present them before a new audience that has never even heard of this project before. And that new audience is basically going to confirm, based on those mock-ups or wireframes, whatever you have, whether the purpose that they see is the same as the purpose that the stakeholders had first expressed. Similarly, it also helps confirm audiences. So in my recent experience, I've worked on a number of federal sites, and the audiences have ranged from federal consumers, as well as U.S. citizens, as well as underprivileged audiences and things like that. Now, each type of audience has a different need and a different bias. And a great thing for the user-focused session is also to look at those mock-ups and those wireframes and understand, is it speaking to the audiences in the way that the stakeholders had envisioned? Because what's very interesting is stakeholders, as any group of humans, is going to have a natural bias. So it's very important to be able to get the session going so that you can really understand and confirm the purpose and audiences. The other thing, of course, UI UX number one is a user-centered information architecture. So there are certain exercises you can do. One's called a card sorting exercise, where you can basically outline what the proposed IA terms are. So in Drupal, your proposed taxonomy, your labels, things like that. If you already have a menu hierarchy built out, things like that. And basically, you run through it in this facilitated session to basically make sure that the users can understand it. So some sample questions at a high level, you're going to ask, what's the purpose of the site? Now, you do this with your actual mock-ups for your site, but you also do this for similar sites. So for example, if I was building a search application, I automatically think of Google, Yahoo, Bing. So I might bring those up as well as similar sites, and I want to understand, from this user-focused session perspective, what do people like about Google? What do they not like? What do people like about Bing? What do they not like? And is there anything in common that I can draw from for my particular application? Does that make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. And then what's also important as part of the user-focused session, if you have it from your legacy information, if you're migrating a site, for example, or redesigning a site, you may already have some data from your legacy site on what platforms are users using to get to your site. So obviously this is a little bit mobile-centric, right? But what mobile devices are your users using? Are they mostly tablet or are they mostly smartphones? It's just helpful to understand that so that your design can be more focused. Similarly, what is the popular information? Because that's going to be central to your actual navigation that results from this. So usability testing, first and foremost, is not the same thing as user acceptance testing. Usability testing is really all about what's the quality of the user experience when they interact with your application. So the fallacy of mockups is it's a static thing, unless, I mean, you can do clickable mockups too, don't get me wrong, but you don't always get to the point where you're really analyzing the user behavior. So that's why the user focus session is more about aesthetics, and the usability testing is really more about understanding the quality of the experience, the functions, can your users actually understand it? So like, how easy is it to learn? I mean, you're not going to have a teacher on the application, right? So the users have to be able to teach themselves how to do the functions you want them to do. How efficient is it? How memorable is it? Because typically you want users to come back over and over again. And then how frequently do they make errors? So there's a concept of a happy path. So when you're designing the application, especially for mobile, there's a happy path. You want the users to get them the least number of clicks. You want them to be able to retrieve whatever information you want them to retrieve as efficiently as possible. So how frequently do users stray away from the happy path? So as an output of these usability testing sessions, you actually get some data. You'll understand the completion rate. Industry target is 78%. So what that means is, going back to the search example, if my primary aim for my application is the user can search for data and find what they're looking for, and that's my test script, find X amount of data, and only 20% of my users can do that successfully, then I've done something wrong. Similarly, you can measure things like number of clicks, time to completion, time to recover. The average mobile user expects things to load in under 4 seconds, so you want to be consistent with things like that. So the prerequisites for usability testing, going back to my original Agile timeline there, the reason this isn't right up front is because you do need some prototype or working functionality, because you need something for your users to interact with. You also need to identify what audience for your usability testing. So earlier I mentioned some of the sites I've worked on, some audiences have been underprivileged audiences. So they actually did a usability test session for underprivileged audiences, specifically targeting those people, because their feedback and their experience is very different than someone who's already very technologically savvy. And so another audience could be Spanish-speaking people, for example, if you have a multilingual capability in your application. So you can really concentrate and focus your usability tests on a particular audience or on a particular function, or both. And what we found in the Agile process, Agile's all about doing as much as possible in a particular iteration, or at least that's how I see it. So you can incorporate usability testing as one of the tests that you perform, not every iteration, but in as many iterations that make sense. And then you treat the feedback just the same way as you treat any feedback from any test. Does that make sense? So the identification of design defects is definitely very important, because that allows you to correct them. The last part about usability testing is you can use a tool called Survey, where you simply ask questions, open-ended questions that are just intended to understand how are users really going to use your site or your mobile application. So just to focus on mobile a little bit, so as we all know, users do interact differently using mobile devices than a desktop. So if you're starting off with desktop, you do have to kind of change your state of mind when you're thinking about designing for mobile. Definitely have a mobile, you have very limited real estate, so you got to eliminate unnecessary elements. You have to be able to prioritize, and you can use the user focus sessions and usability tests to help drive what really gets prioritized. Same thing on navigation. Things need to be readable on mobile. That may seem like common sense, but again, real estate really is at a premium. Same thing for sizing of buttons. If people are going to tap on it, don't make it too small. The hamburger icon, the famous little 3-line squiggly, it's under hot debate on how useful that is. There's an interesting study, I forget the gentleman's name, where the word menu and the hamburger icon was actually, I think, 3 times as effective as just the hamburger icon for indicating menu. So it's just something to think about when you think about designing for mobile. And of course, scrolling. Are you going to have endless scrolls? Try to limit horizontal scrolling. things like that. Now for federal, so as I mentioned, my primary experience recently has been in the federal government. So many of the agencies I've supported have their own style guides. Sometimes they don't have style guides for mobile yet, so it's worth having that conversation. Usually it's something that you can help influence or help drive towards good standards. Analytics is something I mentioned before. It is very helpful to already understand what platforms your users are coming from. It is nearly impossible to support every device out there, and you start throwing in things like the Apple Watch and it gets a little crazy. So you want to go ahead and use analytics to help you prioritize and focus where are you really going to optimize. Standard platform, same idea. Is it going to be an iPhone or not? What version, etc. From a testing perspective for federal government, it's very interesting is how do you do testing? How do you do automated testing? Who's going to be providing the devices? Is it going to be the contractor? Is it going to be the agency? What type of tests are you going to perform? So for example, we've done a number of automated tests specifically geared towards mobile devices. And what's interesting is mobile OSs update very frequently. So there needs to be some sort of test strategy in place so that you can accommodate that. Similarly, security is always a concern. So how are you going to incorporate testing for security for mobile? The standards for mobile are a little different than for desktop. And then finally, compliance, I think hopefully we all know and love, is you have to be able to test for that as well, even if it's mobile. Any questions so far? Go ahead.
Yeah, as you do this stuff and you kind of come up with some heuristics and whatnot, how do you roll that back into the Agile process? What are some strategies you use to kind of make sure that your discovery is getting implemented?
Yeah, so
Repeat the question.
thanks. So just to repeat the question, make sure everybody heard. So the gentleman asked, how do you take the feedback that you're getting and roll it back into the Agile process, if I understood that correctly? Okay, good, you're nodding your head. Basically, you treat it just as you would treat any other feedback, whether it's design, whether it's a test defect, whether it's an integration or something. At the very highest level, it could be its own epic. At the lowest level, it could be its own set of user stories. I find it easier to be at a very detailed level and have them captured as user stories, and then you can go through the same grooming process as you do with your stakeholders so that they can prioritize the feedback. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you feel like you end up with challenges in terms of your backlog becoming too big or things like that because you're inputting so much data as it's kind of changing? Does it slow down the process?
That's a great question, and yes, that is a very real challenge because what we found is as an output of each of these sessions, you do get a slew of feedback. So the way we've managed it is we've just done additional grooming at that time. So we usually plan a couple sprints out. So if we know we're going to do a usability session in 3 weeks, and we have a regularly scheduled grooming session, maybe we'll have 2 grooming sessions instead of 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. Hand it over to James to talk about mobile responsive approaches.
Hi there. I'm here to talk more from the developer perspective, kind of about some nuts and bolts technical approaches to some strategies for retrofitting or starting fresh. There's pros and cons to each, so I'll kind of go through pros and cons. I'll try and remember to show some examples of work that I did. Like I said, I've done 3 federal mobile first projects. Well, 2 mobile first projects and then 1 retrofit. So I have a little bit of experience doing this. So let me get started. So the 3 approaches I kind of have used so far is mobile first for new sites, but there are also kind of strategies to retrofitting sites. So you can, in Drupal terms, you can scrap your existing theme and just start over, or you can do a partial mobile first, where you kind of isolate your existing theme to its targeted breakpoint, and then kind of make a mobile first theme for the rest of the site. And then I came up with the name cherry picking for the third method. I'll expand it a little bit later. So there are some pros and cons, mostly pros in my opinion, to doing sites mobile first. It allows you to think about your challenges really early. If there's functionality that you need to fit in a mobile device, and you're not quite sure how, you can start. I mean, part of the Agile process is starting early, failing early, and iterating to fix it. It fits in pretty well with that kind of methodology. It allows you to, develop and change your markup around a design, so that you're not like trying to scramble and find workarounds for things that don't exist on mobile yet. It allows you to think about what content is important. Going back to what Tanu said, it allows you to think, okay, what do my users want to see when they hit the site on their iPhone or their Samsung Galaxy, etc. It's easier to do progressive enhancement than graceful degradation, just because of the way CSS works. Does anybody need clarification on which of those is which? Anybody? So I guess I'll do a quick overview. Progressive enhancement is where you start at kind of the bare bones level and then add bits as you go, further as you get more screen real estate. Whereas graceful degradation is you start with a lot of functionality and then start paring it back at smaller breakpoints and stuff. It's just easier to do because the cascading part of cascading style sheets to start small and go up. But in general, it's a better practice, better best practice. I guess the biggest con that I could find out there with designers is that designers find mobile first to be limiting, or they have a hard time changing their mindset. For years they've been designing desktop sites, and now they have all these new constraints to work with. I was going to ask the room if there are any other cons that you can think of, like a mobile first approach, because I couldn't think of too many. I've kind of drank the Kool-Aid on this one, so.
Has anybody
I
experienced
don't
it?
even think the last one is a con.
Yeah,
That's a plus.
yeah. Some people could consider it, breaking out of their existing mold, and
maybe in response to the designers, but with the stakeholders, sometimes it can be hard to get them to want to think that way.
Right. The lady said that it's constraining for stakeholders. The stakeholders usually want to see all their content all the time, and sometimes that isn't. It's hard to convince the stakeholders that really people just want to see the most important stuff right up front. You can find different ways of making that content available so that people find that happy path that Tanu was talking about.
And that's actually where usability testing can help you. What we've done is we've tried to educate stakeholders to help them get in that mind frame, but sometimes it's still hard for them. So what we've done too is then we don't say it anymore. We have the users themselves say it. So the usability test, if you have prototypes, things like that, you can have one the way the stakeholder envisions it, which may be a bit too much, and then you can have one the way you would recommend it, and then you can let the stakeholders see based on the data which one is really more optimal.
Something else is analytics too. We have a government site where our stakeholder is really married to those whatever it's called, rotators and
the slideshows.
But we have found, looking at analytics, that nobody clicks on it in general. They come to the home page and just go somewhere else. But that's very hard to fit into the mobile.
Right. My colleague Aith Kwan has mentioned that this is just for the recording, that that carousels sometimes are hard to fit into mobile first. Nobody uses them. There's a great site out there called shouldIuseacarousel.com, I think, and it goes through like all of the reasons why you shouldn't. For federal audiences, 508 is a huge concern for that. But Iquan said that a lot of stakeholders still are married to carousels for whatever reason.
I think the gentleman in the blue had a
Yeah, I was
question.
going to mention, I work for a state environmental agency, and we do a lot of data visualization and a lot of geospatial data applications. And we're moving to mobile first, moving to Drupal, and we haven't addressed how we're going to deal with those applications yet, but presumably very difficult to do that.
Yeah, a gentleman mentioned that he's doing a lot of data visualization and mapping and GIS solutions and stuff like that for a state environmental agency. And yeah, there are developing a lot of JavaScript frameworks that you can integrate with Drupal to do visualizations like that. Things like D3. What's that? Leaflet. Oh yes, we've done some stuff with Leaflet on ICE, which I'm going to ICE.gov, which I'm going to show you a little later. It works pretty well for mapping. Yeah, there are a lot of JavaScript front-end frameworks that can help you with that, and then you can integrate them with Drupal's views module, or write custom modules to help you with that.
You'll just want to make sure from a performance testing standpoint that you do test that, because JavaScript can be a little bit slower at times.
Yeah. I'm going to talk a little bit first about the pros and cons of kind of scrapping your existing work and starting over. You kind of get all the pros of doing mobile first. It's cleaner from a code perspective. You don't get a lot of bloat or technical debt associated with it. And it allows you to maybe upgrade or update technologies you're using. Like the gentleman's data visualization stuff. But you kind of get the cons that we came up with. But it's also not as really cost effective, I guess. You're kind of scrapping work that you've already done to do over, and that might not make some stakeholders very happy. I just wanted to mention it. It's probably not the greatest approach, but I just wanted to mention it because it is one decision you can make. Okay, this is what I'm going to call the partial mobile first example. So what I've done on a site, this is one of the retrofitting examples, sorry. So what you can do is you can, using CSS media queries, you can isolate your existing theme to just your desktop breakpoint. So, the users will they will see your existing work when they hit their site on a big enough device. Now, determining those breakpoints is a whole separate issue. I'm kind of assuming that we have like a desktop, a tablet, and a mobile breakpoint because that's what's worked for us in the past. But there are a lot of strategies for picking different breakpoints. Is everybody kind of familiar with the idea of breakpoints? Okay, I see some nods out there, so that's good. So basically, you just isolate your desktop breakpoint, and then you can create a mobile first sort of idea for your two smaller breakpoints, or however many smaller breakpoints that you need. Again, because of the way CSS works, you can create a media query that applies from mobile up until your desktop, and then your tablet will apply from your tablet up to your desktop, or like 1 pixel less than your desktop, basically. And that allows you to kind of reuse a lot of your code for both mobile and desktop. So, and then it won't affect your desktop at all. You can break these into separate SAS partials. I love SAS. If you're not using SAS, it'll change your life. That's a completely different. That's like a Ruby-based technology that's completely separate from Drupal, but it makes the front-end designers, CSS writers' lives a whole lot better. And then, or you can just in Drupal, because Drupal aggregates CSS files, you can create separate files that work for separate breakpoints, and then Drupal will aggregate them for you. Any questions, comments, concerns, queries, conundrums, etc. so far? Okay. All right. The pros and cons of doing it this way. Your existing work is obviously preserved, mostly untouched. At least part of your site is mobile first, and compared to the other methods, it's easier. Well, the next method I'm going to go over, it's easier to work on with a team, which is kind of a tenet of Agile development. The con is that if you do need to make a change that applies to your desktop site later, you will have to repeat yourself. So that's why I said it's not always a dry process. So what I mean by dry is dry stands for don't repeat yourself. And it's kind of a method of programming to avoid to increase maintainability and reduce development time. Kind of the last approach that I've used is I just named it cherry picking. I'm taking requests for new names. So instead of isolating your current desktop theme, you can use your current theming as the starting point for mobile. Create the larger breakpoints, and then start taking things out of the mobile breakpoint and making that work, and then putting them back in your tablet or desktop. So basically, anytime you make a change, you make a deletion in your mobile breakpoint, you should add it right back to your desktop. So I'll go through the pros and cons of that now. You can reuse some of the work. Again, it might change and introduce some new like, I don't want to say regressions, but some new challenges. It might increase, add some new bugs to your backlog. But it allows you to kind of retrofit progressive enhancement into your existing site. The big red flag cons that you need to think about when using this method, though, is that it requires a lot of organization and a lot of keeping track of CSS queries and all that stuff in your brain or in a tool of your choice, and that makes it really hard to work on with a distributed team, like we like to use at Blackstone. Using Git source control and all that stuff. Okay, any questions about that method or?
Do you use branching as you do it to separate groups?
The question is, do we use branching? Yes, we've used Git branching heavily to implement these. And in some cases, we've taken a phased approach where the site that I'm currently working on, I used the kind of partial mobile first for some parts of the site, but other parts of the site, I used this cherry picking method, just because of the way the sprints were scheduled and the way we were deploying new features. So Git branching is your friend, or whatever source code management you use. It's definitely the approach to use when doing this. So you don't really mess up your existing work if while you're getting ready for it to deploy. Okay, I'll show a couple examples real quick. So this is the first one I did personally. It's immigration and customs enforcement. I believe this is oh no, this would be the desktop breakpoint. But as you can see, you can
Just mention, this site was built with the mobile first approach, so that very first approach which we would advocate for.
Right.
This project was lucky enough to start out with that mentality.
So as you decrease the viewport size, things kind of reorganize. Now this doesn't use it. This uses is interesting because it uses a fixed width layout for the mobile breakpoint. So you get all this white space here, but we kind of targeted it towards an iPhone. So this is 320 pixels wide or whatever. But even while doing mobile first, I just wanted to draw attention to kind of two things. We had to figure out how to do these kind of what do you call them?
Menus?
Yeah, these menus. But there's a name for the menus. I can't think of it right now. The menus with content in them, anyway, with these sidebars and things. And how did we make that fit into a mobile? So we have these columns, and we just kind of hide things as we go down into mobile. That's one issue we had, and then kind of this navigation here, this second level navigation, how to make it kind of easy to navigate here. So kind of just collapsing it was what the solution we came up with. Another mobile-first site is the Agricultural Marketing Service. Again, this is sort of the desktop view. We don't have these mega menus. Mega menus, that's it. And we just have kind of standard menus, and then as things get smaller, different columns reshuffle, and they kind of prioritized their content based on how things would shuffle when going into smaller breakpoints.
And this site was interesting from an Agile perspective because the stakeholders had already come up with an initial design, initial layout, and an initial information architecture, which was very detailed and very good. But with the user focus session, they were actually able to get a little bit more insight on some of the things that they had overlooked. And so I think the final product is a good collaboration on that. Like they were very much, for example, married to their color scheme, but initially it wasn't quite as contrasting. And so from the user focus session, they found out that for areas that they really wanted to highlight, they needed some brighter emphasis. So you'll see a lot more of that dark red, orangey color in certain places because of that. So just interesting that for this particular project, they did go mobile first. They did do the user focus session and start incorporating that feedback right away.
And this is kind of my current project. It's What's Cooking for FNS at USDA. It's kind of a recipe aggregation site. This is the site that I have used both the partial mobile first and the cherry picking methods. So this basically this desktop breakpoint is the existing theme. It hasn't been touched at all. But as soon as I hit this is kind of a mobile first approach. I'm a little hesitant to show you the media queries and everything just because I I don't think I can do it in an efficient manner here, but so basically all the rest of the site was developed that way, and then this new functionality that will be coming out soon, called Menu Builder, is where I started using this cherry picking method to use existing theming that was existing. One reason I chose to do it this way, because this is actually an Angular application, and so some of the theming was and CSS was pretty complex, and there's all these fun drop shadows and CSS gradients and all this really new hotness stuff, and I wanted to keep as much of that in as possible and not lose all those little the little details. So I guess that's maybe another pro we could add to that list, is that you can, if your code's really complex, you can hold on to more of it for the cherry picking method too.
And this particular group of stakeholders, they did actually quite a few different usability test sessions to really understand, is this serving the needs of all of their different audiences? Because they were really trying to hit a number of different audiences with a number of different levels of experience in using technology. So that was very interesting, because it actually really changed a lot of the initial navigation, even details like what links are called, how things are ordered, things like that. And to the gentleman in the back making point before, did a lot of grooming sessions to really prioritize and implement the feedback that they thought was most valuable. So that's something important to remember. Is it's never a one-time thing. In the spirit of Agile, you can do your best, and then you can continue to improve even afterwards too.
Okay, I think that's... What's that? Okay, well, I think I'm done anyway, so unless there are some more questions just about Agile. Oh, there is the takeaway slide. I'm sorry, Tanu.
That's okay.
We'll go back to this. Okay, there are some takeaways.
So we want to make sure that the session was really informative and relevant for you. So these are just some of the takeaways that we thought would be helpful for you. So if you're not already doing it, it's very easy at least to get started by incorporating a user-focused session into your next design, whether that's your next sprint, your next new project. Go ahead and use it. Same thing for usability testing. Go ahead and start incorporating it into your upcoming sprints. Or if you're using Kanban, then just make it an epic and start implementing it as part of work in progress. Hopefully you've seen there are several different technical approaches with pros and cons to each of them. Depending on where exactly you are, it's of course a business decision on which approach you end up using. But hopefully you appreciate some of the considerations around ease of development, ease of maintenance, performance, reuse, things like that. Of course, we're going to advocate do mobile first if you can. But if you can't, for whatever reason, a lot of people are in that situation, there is hope. There are ways to retrofit. Any questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This was really informative and helpful for me. I had a question about the user-focused testing. You talked about sharing an inventory of similar sites. Can you talk a little bit about how you choose the similar sites, and if you then show the sites do you only look for similar sites that are in mobile and show them in the mobile view? Do you look for a mix? Can you talk a little bit about how do you use mobile versions of other similar sites in that phase?
Sure. So how you actually choose that site, just basic research. And for me, what I've done in the past is I would understand what the original purpose of the new application would be, and I would try to find similar popular sites for that type of purpose. So I wouldn't necessarily choose like a mom and pop site. I would choose a well-known site. Does that make sense? And then the stakeholders would, of course, agree to that list as being indicative of or representative of similar functionality. For the mobile, I have found that it is more useful to show both the desktop version and the mobile version. Sometimes actually on devices, like if you have a set of tablets, to show the tablet version, or if it's responsive, you can of course resize it. The reason for that is sometimes helpful to understand what you're losing from the desktop version, because desktop versions tend to be very rich and have more functionality than their mobile counterparts. So if you're only comparing mobile to mobile, you may not get that context. And for the business to be able to prioritize the elements for their new application, it's really important that they understand the context and understand what others have done to prioritize. Does that make sense?
The question was about how to choose the sites to use for user testing and what formats to show. Any other questions? All right, well, our contact information is up there. If you have any more questions, I'm more than willing to come grab a card from me, and I'm more than willing to help out.
And we're also very, very eager for feedback. If there's anything you thought that we could improve on from today's session, we'd love to hear it so we can do even better the next time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.